Okay, everybody, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've done a couple runs throughout the day to make sure we don't have any technical difficulties, but if we run into anything, we got a lot of people on standby to help fix it really quick. So bear with us. If I get any feedback or anything, I'll just move to a different location. I'm going to be moving around a little bit throughout the presentation. Obviously, there'll be visuals to check out up here, and then I'll just be speaking as I move around the room. A little bit about me and kind of why I'm here speaking to you. My name is Sergeant Kyle Stjerne. I've been with the Palm Springs Police Department for 20 years now. I've spent the majority of that time, 18 years on the SWAT team. So my primary responsibility, other than supervising a patrol shift, is to run our regional SWAT team, which consists of the Palm Springs PD, Cathedral City PD, and Indio PD. So we all share resources and we work together to solve significant problems that are outside the realm of what the average officer deals with day in and day out. So just to clarify and make sure you guys understand, you are in the right place. If anyone walked in and said, well, hey, I thought this was the active shooter presentation, am I in a wrong spot? You're in the right place. So we're talking about active shooter incidents, but really it's important to understand and focus on this is not specific to people who carry out attacks like this with firearms. It can happen with any type of weapon, any type of different situation is utilized to carry out attacks like this. So it's not specific to firearms, but here in the States, predominantly that's what we're dealing with. So oftentimes the term active shooter is what's used most prevalent. We're going to go through this presentation. I've been fortunate over about the last 6 years to give this presentation a lot of different times, and it's evolved as things within our communities and around the world have evolved. So I try to keep it as up-to-date and informative as possible. So we have some live attendance people here with us, all of us sharing this experience today. We also are going live on Zoom, so there's other volunteers and people who are going to be dealing with the presentation, or going to be viewing the presentation online. So again, bear with me, I'm just trying to connect to the system here. There we go. So a couple ground rules as we get started. Talk about questions. It's pretty frequent that people do have questions when I go through the presentation. Because I've been fortunate to give the presentation many times, I've tried to structure it in a way that hopefully your question will be answered with one or two of the slides as they come up through the presentation. So with that being said, you'll see that there's microphones on the sides. At the very end of the presentation, if you still have a question that hasn't been answered and you want to ask it for the benefit of the group, by all means, we'll open up a space, we'll line up, and we'll answer questions one at a time. For the folks that are visiting with us on Zoom, you can feel free to type in a question in the chat, and if at the very end that question hasn't been answered, we'll address it in kind. So we are going to hold all questions to the end. The reason for that is it's just going to keep the flow of the presentation moving, and again, I feel pretty confident we're going to get to most of the questions that might come up. Another important thing that I do like to discuss, especially with a group like this, many times when we get asked to give this presentation, it's for a very specific organization. It's at their place of business, it's at their school, it's at their place of worship. So they have very specific needs and wants, what they're hoping to get out of the presentation. So I always try to lead off, especially with something that's open to the public, open to a bunch of different organizations, a bunch of different groups, a bunch of people that might be here for different reasons to try to get specific information. I want to talk about what this presentation is and what it isn't. This is not a political discussion. This is not intended to be a conversation about politics. We're not here to diagnose why these incidents happen. We're here to understand that they do, and we're going to move forward to try to have a better understanding what you as an individual and what your team can do to safely get out of harm's way should you find yourself anywhere near an event like this. So we're not going to argue the benefits or the unsatisfactory nature of dealing with these issues with thoughts and prayers. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to discuss gun control. That's not what we're here to talk about. Because there's going to be the same amount of people who argue that gun control is the primary reason this is happening. There's equally amount of people who will come forward and say, no, no, no. The only thing that's going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So we're not going to talk about that because there'll be equally the same amount of people who will come forward and say, you guys are talking about firearms. That's not the issue. That's just the tool. This is a mental health issue. It's a mental health crisis. All those questions, all those conversations, that dialogue is perfectly relevant. It's important that we have those conversations within our community, but this is not the place for it. This is not what we're here to do today. We're here to understand and appreciate that these events are happening. They're happening all over the country, and they happen at all different types of places for all different types of reasons. You have different people who carry out attacks like this, and they're motivated by different things, and they pick the places that they carry these attacks out for different reasons. They have places that we all go to shop. They have places in individual communities. They pick the communities, and some of the motivations for their attacks are carried out and are motivated by hate. Their hate of specific people and specific groups. And that may be why they choose where they're going to go and carry out an attack like this. Some people are going to go to the places that we enjoy our free time, like movie theaters. They're going to know that they have people isolated in a small environment where there are not as many places that they can go and escape. I also want to highlight the fact that these events are not specific to any one state. This is not a red state issue. This is not a blue state issue. This is a nationwide, worldwide problem. They happen everywhere, including locally. This is a photo from San Bernardino, from just down the freeway a little bit. We are not immune. Nobody is immune. When I say nobody is immune, that means us in law enforcement as well. We've been targeted in these events. So nobody is immune. We all have to be aware of the strategies that we need to try to employ to keep ourselves safe should we find ourselves in an active killer event. Places of worship are not safe, and unfortunately, the most visceral reaction that we often get when these events happen is when people attack our elementary schools and our children. We can all understand why that is a big issue that we need to focus on. So these are concepts that I hope you can take away for yourself, and then you can have informed discussion with your children, if you have them, about what they should try to do should they ever find themselves here. Particularly because we're dealing with the Pride volunteers and the Pride staff, and we're getting into parade season. We're getting into the time of the year that we start to have a lot of local events downtown. Then you also think about street fair. It's important to understand that there's been events that they've targeted simply because it's a large public venue with lots of people, lots of potential targets, like Las Vegas. The Route 91 concert was one of the most dangerous and deadly that has ever taken place. Over 700 people injured, many killed. It was a significant event that really reshaped and reformed how we think about these events and how we try to protect our public spaces when we have large get-togethers for important reasons. So again, it's not about why these things happen. It's not about diagnosing the why. It's about understanding what you should do should you find yourself here. What strategies you can try to employ if you find yourself in harm's way. Because there are best practice, general best practice ideas and strategies that you and your teammates can implement to help keep you safe. These are the things that we want you to focus on, and that's really what this presentation is going to be about as we go through. I do want to touch a little bit about the history of these events, kind of what these events are. I want to highlight that this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. Does anyone know what this photograph is from? All right, hands. Texas. It's from Texas. It's the University of Texas in 1966. Anybody know the name of the perpetrator who carried out this attack? Charles Whitman. Charles Whitman. One of the things that I want to highlight, kind of just touching back on the point that I made earlier with why diagnosing the issue is not always the most important thing, as opposed to understanding our own strategies. Nobody really knows why Charles Whitman decided to carry out this act. Unlike many of the people who carry out atrocities like this, where they leave some sort of manifesto, they leave some sort of photos, some sort of video explaining who they hate, why they're carrying this out, this is an individual who killed his wife, killed his mother, armed himself to the teeth, went to the University of Texas, got up in this clock tower, barricaded himself in there, and just started indiscriminately shooting people on campus. So this is 1966. These are things that have happened in the past. They have been taking place in the past. We just didn't share information in the same way that we do now. With these smartphones and the internet and the way that we all view and have access to information from around the world, it provides us with a bit of a sense that these things are happening all the time. They're happening everywhere, they're happening all the time. So I do have some statistics up here, but I'm going to go through them very quickly because, again, this is not about diagnosing the statistics necessarily, and this stuff is readily available. You can go to fbi.gov, www.fbi.gov, and this stuff is all readily available. But it is important to understand some of the specifics. Take a look at a few of the things that are important to you or to your group, where you operate. How likely is it, statistically speaking, that your place of employment would even be a target of something like this? But again, this stuff is readily available, and it's open to you guys at FBI But let's talk about the modern era. So when we talk about the modern era and when we go through the rest of the presentation and start thinking about what you should do should you find yourself at an active killer event, this singular event represents how we view this situation in the modern era. Now, what are we looking at here? Columbine High School. Now, for people my age range and within that generation, Columbine High School stuck out to us because it was the first time something like this ever happened at this scale, when the internet was starting to come around, email was starting to become prevalent, and information about this, because there was a video feed of some of the things that happened, this got nationwide, worldwide attention. And it really caused us to start thinking about, in the law enforcement community, some of the ways that we were dealing with this. And what we found is that our response to this situation was unsatisfactory. It didn't work. It didn't work because the way that we went about responding to it was geared on traditional models of policing. It didn't identify this as its own individual thing. So at the time Columbine High School happens, law enforcement agencies in the community start getting reports. There are multiple armed gunmen on the campus of Columbine High School, and they are shooting and killing people. So that triggered a huge police response, huge. But it was in a traditional model. And in the traditional model, law enforcement people who responded did what they were trained to do at that time. They surrounded the location, they didn't let people go in, and they hopefully weren't going to let the suspects come out. And then they called people like me on SWAT teams and waited for us to get there to solve this problem, because they viewed it as what? A hostage situation. It was a hostage situation. But through continued study and lessons learned, we came to the realization that that's not what this is. These are not hostage situations, because in traditional hostage situations, the hostages have value, meaning the people perpetrating those incidents, they want to trade the hostages for something, either something politically motivated, financial means, or they just want to get away. They're using the hostages to help themselves get away. But in these events, the only value that we have to the perpetrators is what? Our lives. They want a high body count. That's all they want. That's all they care about. So we can't, on the law enforcement side of things, treat this in the same way that we did other traditional models. Does that make sense? So we had to start doing some soul searching and start to think on a larger scale with how we're going to train our people. So we started training across the nation with some standardized tactics, some standardized responses. We started telling our people, hey, you can't just wait outside. You got to get some specialized equipment together. You got to get some additional weapons, and you got to get in there and make a difference. So we started training in these more formalized formations to help people get inside. This one that you see here is called the Diamond. It was one of the most prevalent because it provides 360-degree coverage for the officers going inside. But there are some fundamental flaws. And as we continued to evaluate these things as they continue to happen, we realized that although we were now empowering people to get in there, stop the killing, make a difference, it required that you had this magic number of 3 or 4 people to create this shape and then make your way inside. Now think about that in rational terms. So let's say I'm right outside the location. I happen to be an armed police officer who's right outside the location. I'm there, I'm ready to go. But my next closest backup officer is at Tockwitz and Farrell. And the 3rd and 4th officer who are going to come assist me are at the police department. How long does it take for those officers to get there so that we can get that magic number 4 and get ourselves inside that structure? And what the long and short of it is this still resulted in an unnecessary and an unreasonable delay. There's too much time. It's a delay. And what we're going to talk about for the next couple minutes, and what we're going to talk about in the theme of this presentation, and it's something that you need to understand. From the time that this starts to the time that law enforcement or somebody else gets there to stop it from happening, you are going to be on your own. You're on your own. You have to have individual strategies that you can call upon, and you can utilize to get yourself out of danger. And that's really what I hope to arm you with, is some of that knowledge and some of that information as we go forward. So where are we now? What I'm going to show you on the next slide is about a 4-minute video, and this is from the United States government. So this is the government's idea, this is the government's information related to what you as a citizen should do should you find yourself in harm's way. So we're going to play that through, and then we'll talk further.
American, 20 years ago, 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 20 years a Can I get you started with drinks?
Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta take this.
We'll need a minute.
No, I'm here. You hear me? Stop.
Hey, you need to back up. You can't be here anymore. Get out of my face, what, man. You think I'm afraid of you? Man, get off, man. 911, there's a clip.
Chances of survival. Don't go up here.
Police, where is he?
By the bar, blue jeans, black shirt. Empty hands up, follow their instructions.
I'm in the direct line of fire if I head for either exit, but I have other options to help me survive. Guys, come on, in here. Come on. Go, go, go. Lock and barricade the door.
Both my exits are blocked by the shooter. I gotta stay hidden. I'm no victim. I'm ready for this.
He's applying direct pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding until we can find a tourniquet. In the meantime, turn off your phones and make a plan to defend yourself.
We have to fight to survive. If you control the weapon, you control the shooter. I'll go for the gun. He'll go for his arms. The bartender will go for the head.
Where is he?
We got him right here.
Please, show me your hand!
Over here.
You can survive a mass shooting if you're prepared. Remember, run, hide, or fight. Run. Wherever you go, be aware of alternate exits. Quickly and cautiously evacuate in a direction away from the attacker. Don't hesitate. Seconds matter. Remember windows and emergency exits. Leave belongings behind. Keep your empty hands raised and clearly visible when exiting a building. Follow all instructions from the police. Don't stop until you're sure you've reached a safe location. Hide. If there is no safe escape route, find a good hiding place. Lock and barricade the door. Silence cell phones. Prepare a defense plan. Fight. Fight only as a last resort. Use available objects as improvised weapons. Use teamwork and surprise. A coordinated ambush can incapacitate an attacker. You're fighting for your life. Don't fight fair. Stop the bleed. A victim can die of uncontrolled blood loss in 5 minutes or less. Apply pressure or a tourniquet to control severe bleeding. Go to fbi.gov/survive to learn more.
So again, this information is readily available. You can go to fbi.gov and find this video. You can share it with friends, family, staff. But when we talk about the concept of run, hide, fight, it's very easy to remember. That's why it's so popular. That's why it's utilized. But how you have to start thinking about this is, how am I going to implement those strategies in my real life with where I work, where I hang out, where I'm visiting friends, or where we are offering a large public gathering? How are we going to implement these strategies? And then you got to think about, realistically speaking, based on your physical self, your physical limitations, if you have any, and you have to decide what you are willing to do to get yourself and others out of harm's way. It's easy to watch the video and understand these concepts, but we have to start thinking about how we're going to use them, how we're really going to put them into practice. That's going to be the key thing. To wrap up where we are now on the law enforcement front, we have empowered, trained, and mobilized our people. Explained to them crystal clear. If you have to go by yourself because there's too long of a delay, that's what you need to do. You need to arm yourself, you need to equip yourself with specialized weapons and the tools that we've provided or that you've provided for yourself, and you have to go. You have to have a positive impact. At the bare minimum, you want to get in there and start to distract the assailant. You want the focus of the assailant to now be on us, the law enforcement side, so they can't indiscriminately keep killing people who are unarmed and unprotected inside. We've encouraged everybody to do that. That's the clear thinking. With that being said, please do understand, for our own safety and our own likelihood of raising our potential of success in a fight for our own lives, we are going to try to wait for people to assist us. Many of the tactics that we utilize to try to do this stuff safely, the more people we have to help us do that, the better. But with that being said, I go back and I rely upon, you can't wait too long to make this happen. You have to get in there and you have to start acting. Because one of the key things that we're trying to do now on the public safety front collaboratively with the fire department is we want to get firefighters, trained medics inside this location much quicker than we have in the past. So over the last handful of years, we've been working much more closely with the fire department. The fire department has taken it upon themselves to get bulletproof vests for themselves, ballistically rated helmets for themselves. They have training that mirrors up with ours so that we can try to get them inside the location faster. So when an event like this unfolds and public safety responds, it's broken into 3 specific categories. There's the hot zone. Now the hot zone is where we have real information to actively believe that the person is still there and still represents a danger. The firefighters are not equipped, they're not prepared, that's not their role. They don't go there. They don't go into the hot zone. That's where law enforcement should be going. There's then the cold zone. Now the cold zone are areas usually outside the general location where we don't have any realistic information whatsoever that there's a danger there. That's where people are going to be staging. That's where law enforcement, fire, and other emergency personnel should be staging. Now this area in the middle, the warm zone, is areas where we know the assailant has been, primarily because there's going to be injured people there. But we don't have any current information to lead us to believe there's still active danger there. Those are the places we're going to team up with our firefighter personnel and create what's called a rescue task force. So a rescue task force is designed specifically to be police escorted inside the warm zone so they can start triaging patients. So when we talk about triage, they need to medically evaluate who is the most significantly injured and needs care immediately. And then we think about that in the terms of all the way down the list to who is injured and needs care, but it's not immediate. Think about it in these terms. Somebody who has a gunshot wound is obviously going to be much higher up on the triage list. You may, in the course of running to get away, you may have fallen, you may have broken your wrist. You do need care, you are in pain, you do need help, but those levels are going to be treated in a different order. Does that make sense? And then ultimately, we're going to evacuate everybody that's still stuck inside the location. Now, keep in mind, depending on where this is taking place, and how many people we're dealing with, think about Desert Hospital. Let's use Desert Hospital as an example. It's a huge campus, multiple stories. If there are hundreds of people barricaded, hidden, locked down within the hospital, realistically speaking, how long is it going to take law enforcement to systematically clear that entire place and in an organized fashion get everybody out of there? It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. So you have to be prepared for that. Then another side of that element, when we do finally get to you, we're going to have you exit the building, like they said in the video, either with your hands up and open. Sometimes they may ask you to put your hands on your head. They may ask you to walk in a single file line with your arms on the shoulders of the person in front of you. All of these things are done for a specific reason. Please do understand that. We get some pushback and we get some comments from people. Why are we getting treated like this? We're the victims. Why are you making us do this? It's so that we can manage the evacuation in a timely fashion and do so because there have been some instances where the perpetrators throw down their weapons and they just mingle back in with the crowd and try to escape. At Parkland High School in Florida, the shooter actually just threw down all of his stuff and was able to evacuate and leave campus with all the other students in the melee. So these are things we have to account for. So just understand that in the evacuation process, that is something that's going to happen. So I had to add a slide to the presentation, right? So as we're coming back from the pandemic, it's been a few years since we've given these presentations, these talks. And as I go through, and I was preparing to speak to you guys and a few other groups that have asked for the presentation recently, as I was going through those last about 10 slides, it just begged to be discussed. How am I going to stand up here and talk to people that this is our strategy, this is what we're going to try to do, knowing perfectly well that there are multiple people, I'm sure through the last handful of slides, that have been thinking, at least in their head, well, what about Uvalde? What happened there? And all I can tell you is I don't have a good, rational answer for you. The ball was dropped. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. Now, we in the public safety, and particularly the law enforcement community, we try to do a good job of not Monday morning quarterbacking people in other areas who were not there, we were not on scene, we don't know all the nuance of exactly what was taking place when this event unfolded. But given what I've just described to you, I don't think most of us in the profession would argue that this was handled appropriately. Because you take away a lot of the things that I told you may have been limitations in the past. When we talked about things all the way back from the 60s and even up into Columbine, at Columbine, we didn't equip most police officers across the nation with this stuff. Over the course of the last 2 decades, we've really been incorporating more and more higher power weapons that law enforcement officers have access to, additional ballistic protection in the form of helmets, rifle plates that will stop heavier caliber rounds that are fired from some of these assailants. You have ballistic shields seen in this video. So there's a whole bunch of cops standing here. So all the things I told you were potential delayers from the past have been removed, yet they still waited. And the only thing that I can continue to tell you is I don't have a good explanation for why that happened. It just goes back to highlight what I said before. You can't rely on anyone else other than yourself. I can assure you that those of us, the professionals in the room, will tell you that I'm not waiting around for this stuff to happen, but when this starts, it's up to you. You have to take personal ownership and accountability for yourself, your safety, and the safety of those around you. Because really, those first initial seconds and minutes are going to make all the difference. They're the key. If you utilize some of the strategies appropriately, like you saw in the Run, Hide, Fight video, and as we continue to talk about here, you're going to be set up for success. And you're going to have a much better chance of getting yourself out of harm's way before it's too late. Before it's too late. So what can you do as individuals? What can you do as individuals and then collectively as teams to help us in this mission? The very first thing you can do is be prepared. And part of being prepared comes with what we're doing here. We're thinking about this. We're talking about it. We're starting to express some of our concerns, some of the ways that we think about this might affect us individually. You have to be prepared. And then as we continue to go through some of the strategies, you got to realistically start implementing them and practicing them on a regular basis. Otherwise, this will just go down as one of those concepts that I heard about this, I heard this guy talking about it one time, but I don't really remember too much about it. Anyone who's played competitive sports before or is trained for something specific will be able to attest and tell you, once you do something, you learn a new skill. You can even practice it for a significant period of time. As soon as you walk out the door, the last day of whatever training evolution that is, about a week later, 80% of that knowledge is gone. 80% of that skill ability is gone if you don't continually practice it and incorporate it into your day-to-day life. So being prepared and thinking about this regularly, not just as individuals, but as teams, as collective groups, is an important thing to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of visualization as it applies to individuals. So when I say visualization, what am I talking about? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing something? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Looking at your surroundings and what could either help you or getaways or.
Perfect. Good. Anyone else? Yes, sir. That's it. That's really what I'm looking for. You guys all did nicely of piggybacking on each other's ideas, which is really great to ultimately get us where we need to go, right? And that's what we're doing here. This is a collaborative effort. But that's really what I'm talking about in the concept of what we're discussing here. When we think about the practice of visualization, I want you to mentally rehearse some of the things that could happen depending on where you are. Now, for those of us that work in the city or those of us who volunteer with different organizations, we typically have places that we operate and we spend most of our time, right? So we're most familiar in those areas. You can start mentally playing out potential scenarios where things like this might happen. And by mentally playing that stuff out in advance, you're setting yourself up both mentally and physically to respond more effectively should you find yourself in that type of situation in the future. Now, this practice, as I'm envisioning it and we're discussing it here, is very prevalent in the world of elite level sports. So in elite level sports, this happens very frequently. So I'm going to show you the next video.
Kids, he's visualizing, watch this now. Now look at this, I've never seen anything like this. And watch at the very end, this is a long one, he's looking right at the spot where he shot the puck. See that? He's I hear guys out there doing their sticks and everything. Isn't that something? Whatever he's doing right. Now look at you looking at that spot again. You got that spot down perfect. You look at, see that? He's getting ready to just snap that puck like that. Bobby did this? Bobby would be in the dressing room. He would not go out. Bobby would be in the afternoon at 2:30 in the afternoon, getting ready for a 7 o'clock game, just like he's getting ready, not quite as early, but Bobby.
So in the context of what we're discussing now, what's this individual doing? He's visualizing playing the game, right? He's playing the game now, hours before it's actually going to take place. And he's so in tune, so astute to what his role, what his exact job is, what the skills that will be needed to be successful for himself and his team are. He can go out and look at a blank sheet of ice, no other players on it, no one else on it, nothing happening. But he can see himself and other people actually moving around the rink and playing the game. Now in sports, one of the reasons this is so prevalent is because the rules are well known. The rules are well known, they're well understood. He knows exactly what the hockey game is going to entail. He knows what the other players are going to be trying to do, and there are shared rules that everybody understands. It's one of the reasons that high-level athletes utilize this very high, but it doesn't mean it's exclusive to them, and that you can't broaden it out to more of the unknown. In the law enforcement community, we call this playing the what-if game. So we have new employees come in all the time, brand new officers with no law enforcement experience. They are always paired up with a more senior training officer, and they spend the first several months of their career with them, driving around, handling calls, and gaining valuable experience through the knowledge and the wisdom of the training officer. And one of the things that good training officers will do when they're just in the course of their daily routine, they'll be driving around. Now let's say we're heading northbound towards outbound 111, on Palm Canyon, and we hang a left on Racket Club. And you see these two individuals walking in the front door of the 7-Eleven. What are you going to do? You pose this open-ended question with very little information to the trainee, and then you just have them run through the likely scenarios and the likely skills that they will need to successfully deal with whatever that is. You ask yourself simple questions. Where would I park the car? Am I going to stop right here as soon as I see it in perfect view through the open windows? Am I going to find some place that maybe has some better cover, some better concealment? What am I going to say on the radio? For new officers, one of the hardest skills for them to incorporate in their day-to-day routine is, how do I do what I need to do and be present in the moment, but at the same time report valuable and concise information over the radio? So what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? What is the relevant information that needs to get back so the people coming to help me will be able to do so effectively? These are the type of skills and exercises you can utilize as an individual in your own daily practice. So if you're working at your place of business and you got a few minutes, you're drinking some coffee, you're having your lunch, take 2 minutes and think about it. Okay, I'm sitting in this relatively small office with a large glass set of windows, and there's 2 doors in and out. And all of a sudden I hear shooting outside the door on the left. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What are my options? If I can't safely get out of harm's way, where could I potentially hide? And if you can't hide and you don't have any other recourse, what can I defend myself with? This is some of the practice that I want you guys to start utilizing on a regular basis, because these are the things that are going to create a well-equipped mental Rolodex of experiences that you can pull from should you ever find yourself in a chaotic and dangerous situation. You will have these things readily available. And what we know through training is that this mental practice is almost as good as physically implementing these things day in and day out. It's almost as good. And it logistically costs you nothing. It's not like your organization has to put together some big training event where we have to try to get everybody there, we got to hire a company, we got to do all these things. It's just yourself playing a mental rehearsal. I highly encourage this practice when we think about this. Now I know this is easier said than done, right? But you got to try to stay calm. You have to try to stay calm, because inevitably it's going to be a chaotic situation. And it's going to catch you by surprise. Even if you're the most self-aware person in the world, this type of event, especially with many of us who are here because we participate in large public venue, you're going to be focused in doing other things, and all of a sudden something's just going to start happening. And you have to respond, you have to analyze and respond quickly and effectively. But you got to try to stay calm, because there's going to be internal things happening within your body, no matter how well trained you are, that you can't control in and of itself. You can't stop them from happening. You can't stop your body from releasing adrenaline. You can't stop your heart rate when you're having a stress, life or death response. You can't stop your heart rate immediately from going up. That's what the body does to protect itself. You have to try to utilize some strategies to stay calm. The very best thing you can do to try to stay calm is actively control your breathing. Actively control the way that you're breathing so that you don't start hyperventilating. And you can start to try to mitigate these effects in your body and bring your heart rate down. Now, the absolute best way to do this in our experience is a practice called box breathing. It's got many different names. Don't worry about exactly all the different names it goes by. Just understand the concept. The concept of box breathing is very straightforward and simple in practice in a controlled environment where you have nothing else to do. You want to take a deep breath in through your nose for a good 4 count. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. Then you want to hold that breath in your body for another 4 count. Let the breath out through your mouth for a 4 count, and then hold no breath for a 4 count, creating that 4-second box. Now again, this is pretty easy in practice, and I can ask you all to close your eyes and do this 2-3 times right now, no problem. But if I incorporate some gunshots, I incorporate some screaming people, I incorporate maybe you weren't exactly ready, prepared, and now you're not as safe and comfortable, utilizing this is going to take some skill and practice. But if you can call upon this knowledge and call on these things when you find yourself in harm's way, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be just in response to an active killer. It could be a major traffic accident just happened. It could be that your child is choking, and now you have to think of the steps of what am I going to do to help my child from dying from choking to death. These are things you can utilize to help you. And I highly encourage that you continue to evaluate which ones you can implement, because again, this costs you nothing. It costs you nothing. It's simple to do. This is one of the best visual representations of what the stress response in the body and the way that we go through life looks like. So what I want you to focus on is that a lot of the people in our community, even ourselves, I'm sure we can all attest from time to time, most of us, at least at some point or another, and a lot of people, unfortunately, all the time are walking around in condition white. They are absolutely oblivious to what's happening around them. Think about the person walking down a busy street with their AirPods in, staring at their phone, clicking away, no idea what's happening around them. They might be walking in front of cars. They might be walking right next to somebody who's perpetrating an attack, who's giving you what we call pre-assault indicators that something is about to happen. But you're oblivious to it. You don't even pick up on it. So now when I tell you to utilize these strategies, you can't, because you're too far behind the curve, because you're totally unaware of what's happening around you. As opposed to where I'd like you to be, I'd like you to walk around most of the time in condition yellow. This is something that represents people who are going about their day-to-day every life, but you're situationally aware. And what that means when we talk about it in this context, if I walk into a new environment, if I sit down at a restaurant, I want to maybe sit down where my back is facing a wall and I can see the restaurant and I can see the exits. I want to be aware if I'm at a place of business. I just gave this presentation a couple of times this last week at the airport to employees from all different categories of the airport. Some work in the back in the sterile area, some work right up front. As soon as the doors open, that's where they work. So these things apply differently to all of them. But you got to be aware so that if you see something like I mentioned, something that we would consider a pre-assault indicator, somebody acting or behaving in a way that just doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem right. I want you to focus in on it. Now, many of the times in our society, we're kind of trained, whether it's official or not, we just want to kind of turn the other way, like I don't want to make eye contact with this person because then they're going to turn whatever it is they're doing, whatever trip they're on, they're going to turn that on me. And I don't want anything to do with it. I just want to get my coffee and get the heck out of here. But I want you to focus in on that because these are the valuable seconds that you have to start getting yourself prepped to respond if that person is in fact being more than just a little bit odd. Because once we move into condition red and that person who walked into your place of business and is acting odd now puts a bag down on the floor, opens it up and pulls out a firearm, you're already prepped, you're already ready. You're already prepped, you're already assessed that this is a problem, and you've maybe even thought about, well, where do I need to go to implement that run, that hide, that fight? Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? Maybe even if it was unconsciously started moving away from that individual. You're creating a little space, creating a little bit of distance so that you're not right in the kill zone. These are all things you can implement because if you make it all the way up to condition black, when we're talking about a stress response, a life or death, fight or flight response, this is when your body is heightened to the utmost. You can't stay here very long. You can't stay in this area very long because the internal workings of your body, your heart rate is going to be jacked up so high, and your body is going to do specific things to help protect itself. One of the things that it's going to do is it's going to start drawing blood away from your extremities and pool it in your core. Why? Say again? That's right. All your vital organs are in your core, correct? And your body, through its DNA, it's been hardwired to know if I'm about to be in a fight for my life, I've got to get more blood to the core so that if I suffer an injury there, I have more time to try to survive. But what happens as a result, because now the blood is moving away, particularly from your fingertips, your fine motor skills are going to be diminished relatively quickly. Now think about that. If you're a person who's responsible, you've got all the keys to the facility. You're the one who can activate, you got to get through that key or that ring of 20 keys, but you can get a key that'll open the door that's going to get people out of harm's way. But now you weren't properly prepped and you're fumbling around with the keys, you can't even get the key in the lock. This is the type of stuff I'm talking about. This diminishes our capability of survival. So we have to know it, we have to understand it, and we have to work against it. So I'm going to show you the next video. I think it is a clip that everyone will recognize for the most part, unless you are really young. Everyone should recognize this for the most part. And it highlights a lot of the stuff that we talk about in the last few slides.
Spin, shark 350. Red one.
Martin, you gotta pull out of the water as fast as you can.
No whistles, no whistles.
Everybody, please get out of the water. Everybody out of the water. Please. For the folks behind you. Come out of the water. Please. Past the refreshment area, please. Let's go. Everybody out.
All right, so for the people in their teens, everyone tell them what movie this is from. Jaws. This is from Jaws. Now, even some of the teens have probably seen this classic, but this clip, in my view, really highlights some of the things that we've been talking about here because it explains visually what we're likely to see and experience when something like we're talking about happens. Now here you are, it's a busy holiday weekend. The town of Amityville, this little beach community, has had a couple significant shark attacks. The chief, the mayor, they've got together with some of the powers that be, and they've come up with a plan. They've come up with a plan. And everything should work according to the plan, correct? Except for what happens when out of nowhere on this beautiful day somebody starts yelling, "Shark!" What do we see? Panic. Panic, pandemonium, chaos. Chaos. You have people screaming, you have grown men knocking over children on inflatable flasks and taking it from them. I don't know what he thought that was going to do, but again, irrational, right? It's irrational thinking because your mind is not able to overcome the stress response that your body is going through. You have elderly people getting trampled in the surf zone. You have kids left to their own devices while their parents have already skedaddled and are out of the water. You have all this happening. You know the lifeguards were part of this thing, and what happens as soon as something out of the ordinary has happened, the lifeguard instinctually starts doing what? Blowing the whistle, which then creates more of chaos, more of a stress response. And the chief going, "That's not part of the plan, that's not part of the plan, no whistle, no whistle." Think of the person who's going to run outside and just think to themselves, well, I'm going to throw this fire alarm. I'm going to throw this fire alarm just to let everybody know that there's an active shooter on here. Except if you don't know that the fire alarm is supposed to mean there's an active killer and not just a fire somewhere, you're going to have a different and unrealistic, untrained response to what's going on. So this highlights a lot of the things that we're talking about. And I think it's important for us to understand that that is some of the realistic stuff that we're going to see should you find yourself in a chaotic and dangerous environment like that. We have to be prepared for that, and that's what I'm talking about with a lot of these slides. The more mentally and physically prepared you are individually, the more you're going to be able to help the people around you not respond like this. Because we can't allow ourselves to become paralyzed by the fear of the situation so that we act in ways that are not in our best interest or in the act of self-preservation. You remember this woman from the video clip? Again, what's the threat in this particular situation? That there's a huge man-eating shark swimming around in the ocean. And she's so overcome with the stress of the event that her instinct and her action is to grab her small child, stand in chest-high water, and just scream. Now, it doesn't mean she's a bad person. Doesn't mean she's a bad mother. It just means she's not properly prepared, and now her response is not in the best interest of herself and her child. We don't want to be this individual. We want to be somebody who has a better sense of what they can do to get themselves out of harm's way. So one of the other things you can do if you have properly prepared is to be a leader. And being a leader doesn't require any type of formal authority. You don't need to have a job title. You don't need to be the boss. You just need to be somebody who can actively help people get out of harm's way. Think back to the Run, Hide, Fight video. There was numerous people in there who were acting as a leader. As soon as the waitress got herself out of harm's way and was going down the stairs, what did she do? She didn't just pay attention to herself. She told all the people going up the stairs, hey, don't go that way. That's where the danger is. Follow me. Same thing with the other woman whose boyfriend left her to go make a phone call. As soon as she assessed she couldn't get out, she found an open door and said, other people, come with me. Let's barricade ourselves in here. And then she took further initiative. She assigned people specific tasks to do. You guys barricade the door, you provide direct pressure to that wound, and the rest of us will prepare to defend ourselves. Because I don't need the 5 people in the room, no one barricading the exits, and everyone getting on their cell phone to call 911. That's not effective, that's not what we need. We need to use teamwork, and being a team leader is a very important aspect of this. Going back to that same concept, then we got to work together. There's something to be said as grown adults with taking care of yourself and preserving thyself, but at the same time, if you're in an environment where people are relying on you as well, you got to try to work together. You got to try to work cohesively. You can't be fighting against the group when what you're doing is then going to be in not everybody's best interest. So we got to work together. If you're fortunate to get yourself out of harm's way and now you're the one who's been tasked to call the police department, or you run into those first 2 responding officers and they say, where's the shooter? Where am I going? How are you going to relay that information, and what are you going to tell the officers? You got to be a good observer. You got to understand what we need to know, what we need to focus on, so that we can get that information concisely, and then we can move and implement a strategy to try to stop the violence. So one of the things that I want you to do is focus on details. Focus on details, not broad generalizations, but details, not just hair color, but hairstyle, not just clothing color, but some specifics about it. Hey, like she said in the video, he's wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans. Okay, that gives me something, but if we think about it, if I'm at street fair, how many people are wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans? That's a lot of people. I tell everyone in the high school environment, if you say, well, they had a backpack with them, you're describing everybody. You're describing everybody. You gotta narrow it down. You gotta narrow it down. So if it's a black t-shirt, does it have a large symbol on it? Does it say, I don't know, but there's yellow writing on the front, I think it said jiu-jitsu, or there's a big Nike swoosh. These are things that are gonna help narrow our focus as we go in that environment, and it's gonna be beneficial. And then lastly, I don't need you to be a weapons expert. You don't have to give us make, model, caliber. We don't need to know that, because most people aren't going to be that in tuned unless you play a lot of modern warfare. That might be my teen crowd. You might be the ones who can help us with that. We just need to know, is it a pistol or is it a rifle? Is it a pistol? Are they armed with a pistol or a rifle? Pistol is like what you see that I have here, what most police officers are walking around with on their belt every day. It operates in one hand. Most modern semi-automatic weapons have a magazine of ammunition loaded in the bottom. By knowing, as the law enforcement responders, that the person is armed with a rifle, that provides me with valuable information about equipment and safety gear that I need to put on before I go in there to stop that threat. Because realistically speaking, if the person, like I just showed you, the person in that clip, the person in that photo, if they're armed with an AK-47 and I'm a street officer wearing a soft ballistic vest with just a pistol, I'm now going into that environment set up for failure, because that person has already got me outgunned. So I want to be able to account for that quickly. And that's where I go back to, our officers should be prepared to defeat that threat right away. Right away. It should take a matter of seconds for us to get extra equipment on, find our rifle, and go. These are the things we need to know. Talk a little bit about first aid. Now, at many of the places that you guys live, work, operate, now for those of you who are really here because you work at Pride and you're thinking about the parade, this is a little bit different, but we need to think about first aid equipment in a slightly different way. Particularly when I go to organizational spots, everybody's got first aid stuff, right? Everybody's got that white box with the red cross on it somewhere. But if you crack that bad boy open, it's got equipment in there that's effective at treating bee stings and cuts. It's not effective for what we're talking about here. So as we move into a world, and it's unfortunate that we have to do so, but as we move into a world where we're thinking about, we're preparing for how we as an organization or as a team can respond should violence like this open up in our area, we need to think about first aid equipment in a slightly different way. And there are many, many, many reputable companies out there that offer trauma-related first aid equipment readily available. And when we're talking about trauma related to active killer events, you need to be able to stop bleeding. Stop and control bleeding. And you have to have properly trained people who not only know how to do that independently, but then if they get handed a tourniquet, they've seen it before, they've trained with it before, they know what to do with it. Because in the video it said that somebody can die as a result of uncontrolled blood loss in 5 minutes or less. The reality of the situation is that if somebody has an arterial injury, they've suffered an injury and an artery's been damaged, you've got about 60 seconds to get that under control, or you are not going to survive most likely. And that's really going to be done with a tourniquet. Now in movies and some stuff, it's not impossible. You can use things as impromptu tourniquets like somebody's belt or something, but the reality is it's not going to work as effectively as something that's made for that specific purpose. So I highly recommend you guys consider investing and training in some of these things, blood clotting agents, and having an understanding of the concept of march, or just how you want to control blood loss. That's really going to make the difference. To give you a very visceral explanation of this, at Columbine High School, there was only one adult member, one member of the staff who was killed, and that was Dave Saunders. He was a teacher. He got shot almost immediately got shot, but he was able to hide and barricade in a classroom with a bunch of students. He died 3.5 hours later. 3.5 hours later of blood loss because they didn't have access to any of this equipment. They didn't have any training with how to control blood loss, and the cops failed horribly, and it took long to get to him. But this is the type of stuff, again, you gotta be able to defend against that. And the only way to stop blood loss is with some specialized equipment. Now, as I've been going through this process for myself about over the last 6-7 years, I've been very fortunate. The department has sent me to additional training opportunities outside the governmental realm. So initially, we got most of our information from the government. This is the stuff that we utilize to help formulate these classes. But I was fortunate to go to this company's training program. This is a private entity. Now, we have no affiliation with them. We do go to their instructor certification training. Many of us have been to it, just informationally. But I bring it up because I like their concepts, and I like it because it's a private company. They have resources that are readily available to the public. And if you are somebody in a position of authority within your organization or community, you can think about, well, maybe these are some of the resources I want to sign up for, I can give to my staff. Maybe they have things that, although we're not going to come and get a big presentation like this, or we're not going to do a big logistically challenging scenario, they have online training modules where somebody can go through a training class for like 30 minutes, see some videos, answer some questions, and just think about things. This goes into that concept of constantly thinking about how we're going to prepare ourselves. Now, ALICE is an acronym, so it stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And if you take the time to really read this stuff and get into it a little more deeply, you'll see that the concepts mirror very closely with Run, Hide, Fight. So they're very easy, and they're a good way to pair up and kind of improve upon one another when you think about them conceptually. What they're both going to give you, what they're both going to tell you, the underlying thing to take away is if you can get away, get away. If you can get out of the danger area, get away. Don't have your first instinct to be to hide. We see many, many times, like at Route 91, for example. This is a large open space, but the perpetrator is attacking you from an elevated position, and you're in an open area. But how many people, when we saw the videos, when we saw the photos, they kept themselves hidden along this little fence, like this 4-foot fence, that's doing nothing to protect you. You gotta get yourself out of harm's way. You gotta move. Your instinct, your default starting instinct should be to evaluate where to go and move, 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 move. Get yourself out of harm's way. Now, if you can't do that, your exits are blocked, your only avenues of escape put you in additional danger, then you can consider barricading and blocking yourself in there, and you gotta use some strategies that are gonna be effective at doing that. But this should not be your default. Don't box yourself in if you don't have to. If you can move away from the location, that is your best strategy. And then if you have to barricade, you need to get creative, and this goes back to that visualization process. If this is where we are, let's just use this ballroom as an example, and all of a sudden there's shooting we can hear on the grass from right outside. What is our instinct going to be? Now, it should be that we should move away and get out of harm's way. And there are multiple avenues of escape to try to do that. But if we find ourselves now, we've made our way into an office where there's no other way out, there's only one door that we just came through, and now I can hear the shooter in the hallway, well, you got to think about what are we going to do to close that off? What are we going to do to barricade that? What are we going to do to harden the target so that it becomes unappealing to the shooter or to the perpetrator? Because if they start yanking on the door and it won't come open, they're going to take likely the path of least resistance and just try to move on and find an easier target. That's what we're relying on. So informationally speaking, a few things that I want to consider as you contemplate the things I'm telling you is two things, two specific factors. One, informationally speaking, 97% of the people who perpetrate attacks like this are male. 98% of them are acting alone. 98% of them are acting alone. Now, I want you to think about why that's important in the context of these skills and these things that I'm telling you. It's because a lot of times, early when we were giving this presentation, or you hear throughout different communities, maybe when you're having discussions with friends or loved ones, well, what if I hear the shooting over there and I run out this door, but there's other suspects and they're lying in wait and there's an ambush waiting, and I run right into it? Can I tell you statistically that that's impossible? No. I can't tell you that it's impossible that that's happening. But I can tell you statistically, 98% of the time, that will not be the case. 98% of the time, if you move away from either the sound or the visual of the assailant, you are moving away from the only source of danger. That is why getting away is your best strategy. Move away. Get away from them. Even in the instances we know about where there was more than one shooter, that 2%, right down the road in San Bernardino, that was perpetrated by a husband and wife team. We know they were together, more than one assailant. Columbine High School, we've talked about multiple times. These two individuals planned this meticulously for over a year, carried it out together. Even in organized terrorist attack, this is the Bataclan Theater in Paris. Organized terror, now slightly different. We can really go off into a different avenue, but for the purposes of what I think gets us the most bang for our buck in this kind of presentation, organized terrorism is a little bit different. These are people that usually have higher levels of training, they have different motivations, and they're operating in cells of people that are attacking in different locations for different reasons, and sometimes at different times. But even in instances like this, we know certain things. People who carry this out in pairs or more, they never move more than a few feet away from each other. And when we think about that, it makes sense. Many a times, like the Columbine situation, they had been planning this out. They don't want to carry it out independently. They want to do it together. The husband and wife team, as a source of security and safety, they're going to stay together. They're not going to do it independently. So the likelihood is, when you hear the shooting in one direction, if you get yourself and put distance between you and that shooting, you are moving closer and closer and closer to safety. So that's what I really want you to focus on. Because if it's me, and what I tell my children is if you can get out of harm's way, you're taking the 98% bet that you're moving away from danger. 98%. And if that's us placing a bet, I'm going to take the 98% chance every single time. One of the things that I get asked questions on from time to time, God, the body count is so high, like the lethality of these individuals is so high. And having reviewed some statistics, they are operating, the people who carry out attacks like this with firearms, at about a 50% hit rate, which is astounding. It's astounding. It means for every 2 bullets fired, 1 bullet finds a person. That's insanely high. Putting it into context for you, in the law enforcement side, where we train with firearms fairly regularly, our accuracy standards are way lower than this. You're talking in the teens. Now, there are several factors for that, but what I want you to focus on is really the most prevalent one and how it's applicable for you with the stuff that we're talking about today. Because these individuals are not all former special forces, highly trained people getting the best weapons training in the world. The fact of the matter is, our response to date in most situations is just making it too easy for them. We're making it too easy for them. They're hitting at such a high rate because we're not doing anything to make it challenging. They know exactly what they're going there to do. They've already made the conscious decision that they are going to hurt and kill people. And then if you just sit there like a sitting duck, you're making it very, very easy for them to be effective. So we don't want to do that. Instead, I want you to utilize some of the things that we're talking about. And if you find yourself with no other recourse, I want you to counter effectively the assault. And there are strategies we can utilize to try to do that.
If you believe that you're going to be confronted, position yourself where you can counter the attacker. Anything can be used as a weapon. Backpacks, chairs, a bottle of water. Space out and create distance so that you're not one large target. The most effective way to control the attacker is with the swarm technique, where the first person in controls the weapon and everyone else grabs the head and limbs and pulls the attacker to the ground. Make sure you isolate the firearm so that the police don't see it when they come in the room.
All right, let's work backwards on this video. So here you see, this is a bit of a visual representation of that diamond formation I was telling you about. Some standardized training that this is one of the ways that officers have been trained to respond. Now, I would argue they shouldn't be standing that close together, but that's my SWAT commander stuff coming out, so I'll debrief that with them later. But this is going to be some of the thing that you might see, them moving through open spaces, that 360-degree coverage, moving towards the area where they have a high likelihood of engaging the shooter. But then let's take one step back, and at the very end he says, if you're successful and you're able to disarm the shooter, you need to isolate and hide the firearm. Now, why are they saying that? So they know that you're not the shooter. Now think about it. If our mentality on the fire or on the law enforcement side is correct, we've mobilized our people, we've equipped ourselves, and now we're moving into harm's way to stop the killing. We get inside the room where we hear people screaming and there's a confrontation. We come in the door and now you're holding a gun over somebody. What might happen? Some sort of friendly fire, right? We shoot the wrong person, which is a horrible thing to have happen. So they want you to use a coordinated approach where multiple people are controlling the actual person, and whoever can get access and remove the firearm should be removing it from the situation and isolating it so that you're not holding it when the police show up. Now, just so you know, this is not specific to the civilian population. We tell officers all the time, we are able to carry off duty. So we have concealed carry. A lot of our officers carry off duty. We train them, hey, if you find yourself and you intervene even, and you're somebody who can have a positive impact by intervening, you better be aware that if you're not careful, I'm now wearing jeans and a black t-shirt. Every day, 98% of the time, I'm wearing jeans and a black t-shirt. And now all of a sudden, I'm standing there pointing this gun around looking really tactical, and a bunch of deputies show up in Palm Desert, and what could they think that I am? They might think I'm the perpetrator. So we need to be aware of that. We need to have an understanding of that. So talking about the swarm technique, now the swarm technique is important to understand. You gotta try to control the firearm, whether it's a pistol or whether it's a rifle. You gotta try to control the firearm. Because even if you're strong, even if you kind of have some skill and technique, if somebody's armed with a pistol and you're wrapping their body up, but the firearm is not controlled, they can still be really lethal with that thing. Now, modern semi-automatic pistols like you see here, if you start fighting over that pistol, they will be able to pull the trigger one time and it's gonna go off. But if you're holding the slide, the part that moves back and forth on the top, when that first round goes off, the gun is gonna malfunction. It is not gonna work properly after that. And it will require them to take several steps to get it back in service. This provides us a window where now we've made them less effective. If it's a rifle, think about that, a shoulder-fired weapon, it's relatively long. You start fighting over it now, the leverage points on that thing, it's gonna be difficult for them to be effective with that. So whoever is closest, you gotta try to control the firearm. And then everybody else has to use your skill and your body weight to take the person down and then render them unconscious or just control them on the ground. Now, a bit of a disclaimer. As a community member, as a civilian who is engaged in violence, somebody who has already demonstrated their lethal intent, the law is gonna provide you a lot of latitude to defend yourself. But if you've disarmed the shooter, and now they're laying on the ground face down and there's 4 people holding all their limbs, and about 30 seconds later you pick up some heavy object and start bludgeoning them to death, you might be in trouble. So again, the law will provide you a lot of latitude to defend yourself, especially in an instance like this where their intent is clear. They mean to do you harm, it's intentional. But you gotta be smart, just be smart. That's all I'm telling you, be smart. Other than that, you hear in the video and you see them and it may seem a little silly at first. A couple people pick up their backpacks, they pick up a water bottle, and it's like, what is throwing a water bottle at somebody armed with an AK-47 gonna do? Well, it's gonna do something very specific. Even if I tell you that I'm gonna throw something at you, you're all sitting here, I just tell, hey, I'm gonna walk up, I'm gonna throw something at you. If I throw something at our faces, what are we gonna do? We're gonna flinch. It is hardwired in your DNA to flinch, to protect your face and head. And not only are you gonna flinch by probably turning away, you're gonna bring your hands up most likely to protect your face. Now, what does that do to somebody who's armed with a firearm? That's gonna diminish their accuracy potential. So these are some of the reasons they give you that information. Hey, throw stuff. You gotta combine the things together though. You wanna throw things and move, or you wanna throw things and close the distance. It should be done with a specific purpose. You shouldn't stay stationary and just start throwing things at the person. You got to combine these two things together. But if you think about it, it makes sense. If all of a sudden someone walks down this middle row here and everybody starts throwing things, well, at the same time, you got people here running. At the other time, you got people here continuing to throw items, and then some people are closing the distance to take the person down. This is the coordinated style of approach we want to have if we have no other chance to get away. This is when the fight is upon you. You're in a room where there's no place else to go, you can't get away. And now you're face to face with the attacker. You have to be empowered and understand you have the right to defend yourself. You have to defend yourself. You gotta be willing to do that. Now with that said, I don't want to sell you false promises and assure you that if you do all these things right, you won't get injured. These are two heroes, two young men who at their school faced down somebody armed with a firearm, and they took the initiative. The young man on the left, Kendrick, recognized somebody came into his class, pulled out a firearm, and he tried to close the distance. He tried to close the distance on the shooter. He distracted the shooter. Other people were ultimately able to take the shooter down and disarm him, saving countless lives, but he got killed. Riley up here, who you see in the two photos on the right, another perpetrator comes to his college, University of North Carolina, pulls out a gun and starts shooting. Riley attacks the shooter and takes him off his feet, tackles him and takes him off his feet, but he got killed in the process. But how many lives did he save? This is, again, I'm not telling you there's no guarantee. If you try to close ranks and physically engage somebody who's armed with a weapon and you're not, there's no guarantee you will be safe. But how many lives did you save? Did you give other people and yourself a chance? You got to have an internal dialogue and conversation with yourself about what you're willing to do. Now that might mean, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person at all, that you assess, well, that's just not me. That's just not me. I'm not physically capable. I'm not the person that can physically take down somebody with a gun. And that's fine. Just incorporate the other things we're talking about into your strategy then. You have to get away then. You have to get away. If that's going to be your strategy and you're not going to be willing or you're unable to physically defend yourself, you have to get away. And then if you're physically capable and you say, not while I'm here, not in this room, not while I'm here, I'm going after the shooter. Just have a strategy to make your chances that much better. Throw things as you go. Don't move in straight lines if you can avoid it. And then as soon as you recognize the danger, you recognize those pre-assault indicators for what they are, you gotta act. You gotta act. Someone pulls out a gun right in front of you, you don't have to wait till they start shooting. Act. Start taking action. You gotta decide what you're willing to do. Because this is just not acceptable. This can't be the way. You're making it too easy if this is your approach. Lying on the ground, trying to cower underneath an elementary school table with your back to the assailant, talk about that 50. How likely is it that this person holding the gun is going to miss? They're not going to miss. They're going to kill you. They're going to kill you. They're going to hurt a bunch of people. This can't be the environment. We have to make it more challenging than this. You'll also hear some people, depending on where they are and the situation that they found themselves, some people will survive, and they say, I survived by playing dead. I lied on the ground and I played dead. Again, does that make them a bad person? Absolutely not. They did what they thought they had to in the environment to survive. All I'm telling you and all I'm asking you to consider is, are you willing to leave your fate in the hands of fate, or purely up to the assailant? And if it's me, and what I'm encouraging you to do, don't leave it up to them. Make it hard for them. Make it challenging. Make it so they come into spaces where they're looking to hurt people and they can't find anyone. They can't find anyone, or whenever they do, they get a hell of a lot of fight back. Make it challenging. That's what we need to do. It's going to take a commitment. It's going to take a commitment both individually and collectively. Oh, come on. Don't fail on me now. Don't fail on me now. We're at the end. We got to the end of the presentation and it quit. That's unsat. That's right, I am. Boom, just like that. All right. So again, individually it's going to take a commitment, and then we're going to have to work collectively, especially if we're part of an organization where we volunteer as teams, we work collectively together. You're going to have to get together and think about these things and how we're going to effectively implement them. And I promise you, if you do that, you're going to be able to face down whatever challenges you face as an organization much more courageously and much more effectively than if you're just grossly unprepared, we put the blinders on, we dig our heads in the sand, and we leave ourselves thinking that, well, it won't happen to me. It won't happen to me, it won't happen here, not in Palm Springs. How's it going to happen in Palm Springs? I assure you, the people in Littleton, Colorado, the people in Sandy Hook, I assure you, those people thought something like this could never happen here. It can happen anywhere. If you take something away from this course, I hope it's that you understand it can happen anywhere. Now, statistically speaking, hopefully it never will. Hopefully we will be prepared for nothing. Think about it in these terms, and Captain Gunkel could tell you. We've had alarms, sprinkler systems, we've had all these things in buildings, schools. When was the last time you heard about someone dying in a school fire? It doesn't happen anymore. Doesn't mean we don't think about it. Doesn't mean we don't prepare for it. Doesn't mean we don't put systems in play that are going to help make that impossible. Make that so it almost is unthinkable. But we still have to be prepared. Okay, so what I'd like to do is open up to questions. Now, if I haven't answered your question, or if there's something that you think is beneficial for the group, what we can do is you can just head over to one of the microphones and ask. By a show of hands, does anyone have questions that they want to ask? If not, that's okay. Anything via the Zoom, via the Zoom chat? Okay, so again, one or two things is likely. Hopefully, I've been doing this enough that questions that may have come up were answered throughout the presentation, or some people just don't want to ask, be the courageous person like sitting in the front row to come ask the question. You can always email me. Always contact me at my City of Palm Springs website. Hey, I didn't feel comfortable asking this in the group, but I really would love to know more about this, that, or the other. If I can't answer it for you, I will point you in the direction of somebody who can. Gunkel, anything? You got anything? Yes, ma'am.
We're here because of Pride Festival and Parade. Could you give us your comments a little on what might be able to be done in those situations? They're not a building and they're not an isolated location.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about things in these large public venues, we go back to like the Route 91 festival. The benefit that you're offered is that because it's in a large open space, you should have more avenues of escape. You should have more places to get away. The likelihood that you're going to get contained in a place that you can't escape and you're going to come face to face with the shooter is diminished. The problem, like at Route 91, is that the attack could be coming from a lot of different areas, and you have to navigate a larger crowd. So what you need to ask for yourself is, where within the crowd can I reasonably be? If I'm a person who can quickly get myself out of harm's way and navigate a bunch of people running and moving, no problem. But if you're someone who's like, I don't move around that well, I'm not that ambulatory, maybe you need to be in a position where you're not in such a densely populated area. And then I go back to constantly that being in condition yellow. If you're a volunteer, you've taken it upon yourself. Now everybody wants to celebrate Pride, but you got to ask yourself, am I at Pride as a volunteer for the organization to help be a key component of making sure the event goes off without a hitch? Or am I there just to enjoy Pride? Because if you're there just to enjoy Pride, then you're there more as a participant. Now, those of us who take on an active role where we are volunteering or we're a staff person, to me, you have a heightened level of responsibility with how focused you are about what's going on and what you're willing to communicate to other organizers, the law enforcement personnel, and the public safety people that are there. You have to be kind of visually aware. You have to be scanning and assessing what's going on in your area of responsibility. So I think if you can stay diligent, stay vigilant about what's going on around you, I think your likelihood of being able to implement these strategies goes up and up and up. Now on the law enforcement side, we respond, and it's been an evolutionary process. We continue to respond to events like Pride, Festival of Lights Parade, Veterans Day Parade. We respond in a much more thorough fashion than we ever did years before. We have members of my team who are up on rooftops. We are down on the street. We have people who are utilizing many different styles of tools and resources to help try to identify pre-assault indicators and threats before they could ever truly evolve. Now, with that being said, if there's 100,000 people here, we can't watch everybody. And that's where it's going to take the eyes of everybody and the commitment of us as an organization and group to help use that for the betterment of those of us that are there as either a participant or a volunteer. Yes, sir.
We actually have on our website, we have the Palm Springs Pride Volunteer group page. We also have a section
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Did everybody hear his question? Is everyone able to hear that okay? And we touched about that a little bit in those initial slides where what I want to try to encourage everyone to do as we start to think about these things as you are. It's important to recognize why my particular event or my particular group might be targeted by individual people. But I really want you to focus on how you can implement the individual strategies so that it doesn't matter if it's an organized hate group that is targeting the event because of the hate ideology, or if it's just somebody who's angry at the world and wants, because Pride is going to be packed, I just know that there's going to be tons of people there. I want the strategies that you think about employing to be effective no matter who it is, no matter what their motivations are. Now, again, what you will see, I think to hopefully answer your direct question, people who are going to be organized and acting in groups, now that may make them a little more easy to identify, especially if you can see people acting in coordinated ways that is a little bit strange, a little bit suspicious. So as a volunteer and as somebody who's in tune with that, pay attention. Pay attention to it and report it accordingly. Think back to the Boston Marathon bombing. So again, it's not an organized group per se, but it's two brothers and they're acting in tandem and they were doing certain things, and when we review it after the fact, these things stick out like crazy, right? They stick out like crazy. Well, they're walking with this giant heavy bag. If somebody was at at Pride and they just set a huge pressure cooker down at Arenas and Palm, that would be weird, right? That should be an indication that that is not normal. And if you're paying attention to that, you can get that reported immediately. So at the bare basics, maybe we clear the area. So when you talk about maybe groups of people who have hate motivations or their reasons for attacking may be more than one, don't diminish though that even people, oftentimes groups in particular, are not going to act in concert. It'll be that one person who's willing to trade their life for the cause. So don't, but again, it's worthwhile to look at these things through the lens of whether it's a group of 5 people or it's that one person. How can I implement these things to try to keep us safe? There's one question behind you and then I'll get to you. Yes, sir. Yes.
Like this guy said, are you guys actively tracking hate groups? I mean, there's hate groups, some are churches saying gay people should be shot in the head. Are you guys actively tracking people like that coming into this area who literally are out? I mean, they're being told by their pastors to do this, which is pretty sad.
Well, there's motivations across the board. We do have people who work in our detective bureau. We have people who work at intelligence centers where this type of information funnels through. And whether it's the film festival or whether it's a major event like Pride, we're going to get and reach out to other larger entities, whether it's at the federal level, maybe at the state level, to get active intelligence, anything that is known. Now, many times, and if we don't know about it specifically in Palm Springs, in-house within the Palm Springs PD, we'll reach out to those larger entities to try to get that active information. But if we got active information, say for whatever reason you became independently aware that somebody made a threat, you saw a threat on a feed from Facebook or what have you, that information should be shared with us right away so that we can assess it through our own investigative process, and then we can also filter it up to larger agencies for them to assess as well. But I hope that answers it. We're always assessing anything that's going on, whether it's individually based against another individual, especially if it was going to be geared towards a large group that we know is about to host a large event, no matter what it was. We're tracking that to the extent possible. Yes?
Do you mind repeating that question because people on Zoom couldn't hear the question?
Yes, the gentleman asked if we, as a Palm Springs Police Department, are actively tracking any hate groups in the area. And again, my response is we're tracking any threats that come across. We don't have a specific intelligence unit that's all they do, but we have access to people who work in those Homeland Security entity organizations that's the type of information that gets filtered through them. Yes, sir.
don't know me yet, I'm the new Assistant Director of Operations for the Pride Festival. And I come to you guys from Coachella. So for the last 15 years, I've been the Director of Logistics for the festival, also part of the safety operation. And I can tell you, in answer to your question, there are dedicated Homeland Security and dedicated FBI agents, and the FBI office in this area is phenomenal. And all that information is being monitored by some parts of those groups, whether it's here or in other locations, but instantly that information gets shared. And to reiterate what he was saying earlier, we all have to be self-aware. I had an active threat in the truck stop this year, not an active shooter, but an active threat. He threatened to kill people in the truck stop. He was banging on one of the doors. Obviously, he was high on something, and then he started racing through the truck stop with his truck. I called a 911. Our public safety division of our company was there in about 30 seconds. It was about 15 minutes before uniform showed up. So it was, and because we had all had the training and we had all rehearsed it each year, everybody spread out. Everybody went away. As soon as the threat started happening, we all have to be active in looking at this, being aware. As a friend of mine once said, keep your top eye open. You know, keep your spidey sense open. And that's the best thing that we can do, because it truly is up to us to make sure that we're being aware. See something, say something. Make sure that you're always scanning around looking at it. As he said, when you go into a room, know where your exit is. Know what's coming ahead of you. This is fantastic, and I'm glad that we've had such a big group, and I'm really proud to be a part of you guys. So thank you.
Anybody else? Well, again, if something comes to mind, go ahead, Arnold. On Zoom?
Okay. Yeah. I think you've covered most of them, but oh, hang on, it's frozen. There were a couple of people that were asking how you could implement these strategies at a parade, which I believe somebody here asked locally. Also, a couple of questions if there were known threats, and that's why this training was happening. I think you addressed that as well.
So to answer that question, that is a very good question. Just so everybody's on the same page, at this point in time, as I stand here right now, there are no known threats that I'm aware of. So at this point in time, and it would, at some point, I would be part of the mechanism that would be made aware. If there was something that was known or on the horizon, as we gear up for parade season, we would have that information. So like I've told you, there's very few absolutes in this world. There's no way for me to be able to tell you there isn't a threat floating around out there somewhere. But at this point, I have no reason to believe there's an active threat towards any, whether it be Pride or any of the upcoming large-scale events that we have. With that being said, anytime something does come up, it's gonna get funneled through some of these Homeland Security enterprise features. We do have an FBI office here, and we have access. We do have a detective who's assigned to a regional task force where their job is to work with Homeland Security professionals where they look through digital information like this all the time. So that stuff does get translated. Yes, sir. I'll just repeat his question. I don't want you getting your steps in today. I don't want you to get just so everybody and everyone online heard, he shared some information that there was some Proud Boy activity at an event in Riverside that did lead to levels of violence, including some fistfights. That is all good information to know. Just as a piggyback question, based on your knowledge and information, were they identifiable, meaning were they wearing Proud Boys paraphernalia, things like that? Okay, so that is another interesting thing to consider since you brought that up. And consider it in the terms that if a group of 12 people show up to Pride wearing Proud Boys attire, they're likely not there to carry out something like the Boston bombing because they're going to they're intentionally drawing attention. They're trying to provoke a different reaction. Now, I'm by no means saying we don't need to worry about that or think about that. I'm just saying in the context of how we go through that visualization process of like, well, what are these folks likely here to do? And it's probably, if they are self-identifying in that way, regardless of whether they're group affiliation, it's probably more to provoke individual violence. And then we have to think about what strategies we as individuals and groups are going to use to combat that, to effectively deal with that. The most important thing to do is if all of a sudden you and individuals are getting out of your car and you see people walking down the street and they're wearing a bunch of garb or gear that identifies them with a group that has problems, we want to make that known to law enforcement and security as soon as possible so that we can use our resources to keep an eye on it. But thank you for sharing that. I know somebody told me earlier there's a Pride event up in Idlewild today, so it would be very interesting to get continued information as these events unfold and they get closer and closer and closer to our own event. You know, are we having instances of that in different areas? Because if we can assess, well, individuals showed up to cause a problem at Riverside, they went all the way up to Idlewild to cause a problem, that helps us start to facilitate our plan that we should anticipate they're probably going to come here as well. So that type of information sharing is some of the stuff that is very beneficial on the front end as we plan and think about. So that's very helpful, very good information. Yes, sir. Yes. So his question is, when we're going through our visualization process or on the public safety side, do we think about worst case scenario? And we do. Our firefighter brothers and sisters they are highly effective at utilizing the incident command system where they kick into effect things that are going to immediately go into play as soon as there's a mass casualty incident. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a shooting or an act of violence. That could be a natural disaster, but something takes place where they're going to put into place, they're going to have a triage location, they're going to have a command post. There are people with designated roles and responsibilities, so that happens very effectively or as effectively as possible. And when you're going through your own practice of visualization and thinking about, I would encourage you to always gear towards thinking about things with your best case scenario, meaning what's the best outcome I can hope for given how I structure the thinking in your head. Meaning, if I'm out and about at Pride and I'm in the middle of a busy intersection and I have the ability to get away, how am I going to do that? But now if we translate our thinking a little bit and we go more toward, now I'm isolated, I'm in an isolated place, I have no avenue of escape. I think it's beneficial to think about those things in both contexts so that you can pre-plan for wherever you find yourself. But on the public safety side, we do that. The firefighters they practice it all the time. Every time we have a lost hiker, every time we have somebody who needs to be rescued off the mountain, the firefighters are very effective at putting this into practice. They utilize it the same way they would should we have a mass shooting. And that's very good for them because it doesn't differentiate, it doesn't matter which one happens. They're going to be effective at implementing that strategy. So we would be better served by training with them on it more regularly because we do not have the luxury that they do to practice it with events like that. We would be better served by practicing with them more regularly to utilize that system. But we do think about it across the board. We have had a few scenarios take place in the past where we actually did a live event where we had people go to the high school, we had role players, we had people as simulated casualties, and we played the whole process out, including setting up a command post and doing some of those things where our higher ups have to come and get involved, make some decisions, and get in on that process. So, like I told you, in the same way, we are subject to some of the same limitations that you as individuals and as groups are. We are not always afforded the time or the logistical opportunities to plan large-scale events like that, training events. So we have to get creative. And the same type of stuff that I'm telling you is the same type of thing that I would tell our newest officers that they should start implementing in their day-to-day. But that's a good question as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you guys. It's been unbelievable. You chief, but I mean, fire department has really been awareness is happening now. But I know part of my community really appreciates it. So
Good. Good. Well, it's a pleasure, and we really appreciate the opportunities to engage. For those of you who maybe haven't met Chief Mills yet, Chief Mills is big on engagement, big on public engagement, big on getting out in the community, making himself a part of the community. And by shaking hands, having coffee with people, he wants to spread the word that the best way for us to effectively face our various issues that come up, whether it be community, quality of life issues, crime related, what have you, is for us to get people together in the room and talk about it. Talk about how we're going to effectively deal with it. And I think that this can fall in the same ballpark. We just have to think about this. I just try to encourage people, as I've given this a lot of thought over the years, that we can do the best job we feasibly could do. We could be the most well-equipped. We can have people with the right mindset, physically fit, all the right training. Even if they do everything right, there's still going to be that window of time where you guys have to effectively take care of yourselves, because we won't be standing right there. Even at Columbine, there was an armed police officer in the parking lot when that started, but that didn't end the situation. So there are many, many instances where you're gonna just have to figure these things out for yourself for that brief period of time. And then if we're doing our part, we should be there quickly, especially in our city. Our response times with things that are emerging, where there is life and death threat, we should be there very quickly. Yes, Ron, go ahead.
Hey, Kyle, can you walk through a scenario of actually at the parade with 8,000, 10,000 people participating in the parade itself, hundreds of vehicles? If something happens, what should people on the cars who are driving do? What should people who are on floats do? What should people who are just marching in the contingents on the street do? Sure. What is that? What if?
Perfect. So what Ron just described, basically asking for a specific scenario for me to lay out for you. What you're basically asking for is something that I believe we as law enforcement, public safety groups, as well as organizations as a whole should be doing. These can be considered brief tabletop exercises where somebody is tasked with coming up with a scenario. There doesn't have to be any rules to it. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. It doesn't require the logistics of getting people organized at a specific place. You can just get a cross group of people from different parts of the organization at a table, and you throw out a scenario. So let me throw one out for you, and then we can think about this. Now, we don't have time in this environment. This isn't the right environment to actually talk through all those things, but I want you to think about how you can implement something similar, maybe in smaller breakout groups in the future as you guys get closer and closer to implementing your Pride for this year. All right, so let's say we're right in the middle of the parade. It is legitimately the middle of the parade. You have full crowd capacity along the sidewalks, cheering, participating, focused on the parade. You've got all the cars. So now you've got cars that are towards the end that are leading to the area where we're now off the route. Handful of those cars. You got a bunch of cars that haven't got on the route yet, and then you've got full cars along the road. Someone driving a rented U-Haul crashes through Alejo and Palm Canyon, crashes into a vehicle, killing a bunch of people standing on the sidewalk by running them over, and then as soon as they crash into the vehicle, they get out with a firearm and they just start shooting people. So this is going to depend on where you are. So as you run this table talk conversation, what somebody at Arenas and Palm is going to do versus somebody who's right in that intersection of Alejo and Palm, that's going to change drastically. Now let's say you're somebody, because I think the other question came up, well, I'm in the car, what should I do? Well, you got to ask yourself a legitimate question. If you're actually in a vehicle that's on the route, you who have done this before, who have been through this process before, realistically speaking, now throw in some chaos with all those people moving. What's the likelihood we're going to be able to drive that vehicle? Probably minimal, I would suggest it's worth considering that if you can identify where the threat is, remember 98% of the time the threat, and in this scenario it's coming from one place. Whoever was in that rented truck, whoever crashed into the vehicle and is now out on their feet trying to shoot people, that's the threat. So where from your car can you safely get maybe behind it, putting the vehicle between you and them? And then when there's a window of opportunity, where can you move? Now, am I going to move east? Am I going to move westbound down Alejo where I'm still maybe in the line of sight? Or do I want to consider trying to maybe get to the left or the right where I now put other buildings and heavy objects, heavy trash cans and things between me and the perpetrator? Those are some of the things that I think you want to utilize. And for people who are actually in the parade, I mean, I know some of the vehicles, large vehicles, maybe 20 people on the vehicle, you're going to have to figure out, like if there's a large truck with people in the back of the truck, well, how are we going to get those folks out of there? How are we going to get the folks out of there? And that, we go back to some of that teamwork. Somebody's going to have to get out first and then maybe help people get in and out. What if we have somebody who has a physical impairment and they can't move effectively? Who's going to be stepping up to be a leader to help get them out of harm's way? So those are some of the, I mean, I know that's a very generic and compressed response to your suggestion, but something simple like that, when we talk about visualization and putting it into context, is now in about 3 minutes, we've thought about a specific scenario that might happen. Now you can change this in any number of ways. Maybe the perpetrator says, well, I'm not going to wait till I target a specific car and they're in the middle of the parade because I know that's where the cops are concentrated. I know the cops are concentrated at the middle because they've got to be spread out, right? So maybe I'm going to attack the pre-staging area because that's where everyone's going to be stacked up. Everyone's starting to get their pre-party on a little bit and they're not situationally aware. They're trying to have fun. They're trying to enjoy the event. So maybe that's where I'm going to go. Now flip that on its head and say, well, I don't want to attack that. I want to wait till the cops are all tired. I want to wait till the cops have been hot, they've been tired, they've been standing in the sun, and the last car just left the route, and they think it's time to go home. They think it's time to go home. They're already starting to mentally shut down. Now I'm going to attack the final load-off area. That's where I'm going to attack while people are getting out of the cars and they're not paying attention. You can play this out in any number of ways. Those are some of the tabletop style exercises I think you can do. And then you can personalize it. I mean, if you're Ron and you're responsible for the whole event, he has to think about all the potentials, all the different things that might happen. Whereas, well, I'm a particular entity, my business has a float in the parade. Yes, I want to know that the entire event is safe as possible, but I really got to think about my team. I really got to think about myself and my team. And then you can compartmentalize the way you go through this exercise in any number of ways. Is that helpful? Does that make sense? So those are some of the things I recommend that you guys do. I think it's helpful. I encourage our staff to do it all the time. We do it in the SWAT environment often because we are limited. We are limited with where we can go, and we are limited with how many people we have. It's hard to have a situation where there's a bunch of hostages, there's a bunch of other people. Just getting the amount of role players that I would need to facilitate that is very challenging. But I can put my team in a room, I can put a couple of slides up on a PowerPoint, ask some really open-ended hypothetical questions, and let them figure it out. Let them figure it out. That's that mental rehearsal. That's those tools that you guys can utilize in the future. On behalf of the entire Palm Springs and fire departments, I thank you for making yourselves available today. Hugely helpful for us. It's important that we recognize you guys are taking time out of your day to interact with the agencies and try to gain some better understanding and knowledge. On behalf of Chief Mills and our entire organization, we say thank you very much. So thank you guys, appreciate it. Thank you. Got it. Nice meeting you. We'll see you soon, yeah?